After being knocked down from 11-9 following the poaching of Hawaii and UC Davis, the Big West has responded by first double dipping into Riverside for Cal Baptist and now returning to the Beehive State for the first time in 2 decades with the Oregon Duck-slaying Utah Valley Wolverines. First, looking at athletic budgets for the new look 11-school Big West, there are 3 numbers here. The top number above each bar is the overall athletic budget. The second number, which is in the white grayish portion of the bar, is how much of that athletic budget is devoted to student aid money. And then the bottom number, which is in the colored bars, is how much of their athletic budget is left over once you isolate that student aid money. Now keep in mind, Cal Poly's athletic budget is going to be inflated due to playing football, but otherwise the top athletic budgets in the Big West, after isolating scholarship money, would be Cal Baptist, UC San Diego, UC Irvine, Long Beach State, and UC Santa Barbara, and Cal Poly would probably fit in that Long Beach, Santa Barbara range after you were to isolate football. Now men's basketball budgets. You can see that Cal Baptist, UC Santa Barbara, and UC Irvine have kind of separated themselves from the remainder of the Big West. Utah Valley's men's basketball budget would be above Cal State Fullerton, UC Riverside, and Cal State Bakersfield. If we look at 5-year KenPom, the Big West has 3 schools in the top 120. The Anteaters are in 88th. Utah Valley would come in second at 117th, and the Gauchos would come in third at 118th. And if we look at 10-year KenPom, the Big West would have 3 schools in the top 140. Once again, the Anteaters would lead the way in 93rd. Utah Valley once again would be second, 139th, and the Gauchos would be third in 140th. Utah Valley not only strengthens the Big West on the court, but also in fan support, as their attendance would rank third in the Big West after Cal Baptist and UC Irvine. All 11 Big West schools are similar in that they have enrollments above 10,000. 10 of the schools are public, with Cal Baptist being the lone private. And you have a lot of Big West schools with somewhat monstrous enrollments, as Utah Valley has 46,000, UC San Diego 45,000, Fullerton 43,000, Long Beach 41,000, UC Irvine 37,000, Cal State Northridge 36,000. In fact, if you look at the largest enrollments in Division I for schools without football, the top 4 are all in the Big West. Utah Valley is number 1 at 46,809, UC San Diego number 2, 45,273, then Cal State Fullerton at number 3, and Long Beach State at number 4. Utah Valley has been one of the most ascendant schools in Division I in terms of where the school was 50 years ago and where it is today. In 1976, Utah Valley had an enrollment of only 3,800. Today, it's 46,800. Interestingly, BYU established an enrollment cap of 27,000 in 1976 and did not increase it again until 1997 to 29,000. They've been gradually increasing it ever since. And BYU establishing that enrollment cap correlated with the surge in enrollment at Utah Valley, as Utah Valley's enrollment exponentially grew 12-fold by 43,000 students from 3,800 in 1976 to 46,800 in 2024 for a 1,206% increase. And with that boom in enrollment has come a boom in facilities. Utah Valley's basketball arena, the UCC Youth Center, at 8,000 seats, would be the largest arena in the Big West. They're also opening a soccer stadium in August. I believe the opener is against Utah. That stadium was built courtesy of a $20 million donation. Then a separate $17.7 million donation renovated the baseball field and constructed a performance center. On top of all that, Utah Valley has a somewhat new basketball practice facility. If I recall correctly, that was built in 2017. Utah Valley's location is attractive to the 10 California schools in the Big West, as Utah is the fastest growing state by percentage. From 2003 to 2023, it grew by 44.8%. And that growth has been powered by California residents migrating to Utah. You can see from 2005 to 2022, on a yearly basis, somewhere from 15,000 to 24,000 California residents would migrate to Utah. In total, that 17-year span saw over 311,000 Californians move to Utah. Now, if you dive deeper into those numbers, 40% of California families that moved to Utah made 6 figures, compared to 28% of other states in migrants to Utah. Moreover, 15% of California households that moved to Utah in the year 2022 made at least 200,000 compared to 8% from other states. In 2022, of all the people in the country that moved to Utah, 20% of them came from the state of California. That actually doubled the number 2 state, Washington, at 9.7%. So if you look at that pyramid of the importance of Utah at the top, you have Utah is America's fastest growing state by percentage from 2003 to 2023. Then California is the number 1 exporter of migrants to Utah at 20%, doubling the number 2 state. Then 40% of those California to Utah families made at least 6 figures when the average was 28%. And finally, 15% of those California to Utah households made over $200,000 when the average is 8%. So not only are Californians moving to Utah in massive numbers, but a lot of them have a lot of money to spend. On the reverse side of the spectrum, the state of California is very important to Utah Valley for student recruitment. If you look at 2022 numbers, California was the number 1 out-of-state exporter of students to Utah Valley, and California alone accounted for 3.5% of Utah Valley's first-year high school graduate students in 2022. Looking at travel, the investment and future expansion of PVU Airport is paying dividends. PVU flies direct to SNA Airport and SBD Airport. Those 2 airports are near 5 Big West schools. And Utah Valley is under a 20-minute bus ride from PVU Airport, as opposed to an hour-plus bus ride from Salt Lake City Airport. So if you were to break down the travel for each school, and this is my attempt at trying to figure out what the non-revenue sports travel would look like if they fly commercial. Obviously, men's basketball and women's basketball would be flying charter, but I'm referring to non-revenue sports here. You could see how UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, and Long Beach have 10 to 20-minute bus rides to SNA Airport, then a 2-hour flight to PVU Airport, then a 20-minute bus ride to Utah Valley. Pretty easy travel. Cal Baptist and UC Riverside would have a 35-minute bus ride to SBD Airport, 2-hour flight to PVU Airport, then a 20-minute bus ride to Utah Valley. Pretty easy travel. Now, the other schools would not be as close to an airport that flies direct to PVU, so instead they'd be flying commercial to Salt Lake City Airport for non-revenue sports. And UC Santa Barbara would have a 5-minute bus ride to SBA Airport, 2-hour flight to Salt Lake City, then a 1-hour bus ride to Utah Valley. UC San Diego would have a half-hour bus ride to San Diego Airport, 2-hour flight to Salt Lake City, 1-hour bus ride to Utah Valley. And Cal State Northridge would have a half-hour bus ride to Burbank Airport, 2-hour flight to Salt Lake City, and then a 1-hour bus ride to Utah Valley. So the only moderate difficulty I see here for non-revenue sports travel if flying commercial would be Cal Poly and Cal State Bakersfield, as it does not appear that Salt Lake City offers commercial direct flights to a closer airport for those 2 schools. So unless those 2 were to charter non-revenue sports from a nearby airport to PVU Airport, or would just fly connecting commercial flights, then they would have an hour 45 bus ride to SBA Airport in Cal Poly's case, and a 2-hour bus ride to Fresno Airport in Bakersfield's case, to take a 2-hour flight to Salt Lake City and a 1-hour bus ride to Utah Valley. Overall, I see pretty easy travel to Utah Valley for at least 9 of 11 Big West schools. Utah Valley's meteoric rise is pretty fascinating. In 72-73, they were called Utah Tech. They would officially start intercollegiate athletics at the junior college level in 72. A couple years later, in 74, they would join the Intermountain Collegiate Athletic Conference, the ICAC. A dozen years later, they would join the Region 18 Basketball League, later renamed the Scenic West Athletic Conference. In 87, Utah Tech would be renamed Utah Valley Community College. A half dozen years later, in 93, Utah Valley Community College would be renamed Utah Valley State College. In 03, they would leave the junior college level, and in 04-05, they would play their first full D1 schedule. In 08, Utah Valley State would be renamed Utah Valley University. In 09, they would join the Great West. In 2013, they would finally have access to an AQ in joining the WAC. And now they will join the Big West in 2026. Here's a look at the timeline of Utah Valley, coinciding with the changes in their school name. The timeline of when they played in the NJCAA, junior college, and when they moved to the NCAA. The different leagues they were in, the Intermountain Collegiate Athletic Conference, ICAC, the Region 18 Basketball League, which became the Scenic West, then eventually a Division I Independent, then Great West, then WAC, and now Big West. And at the bottom, you can see how all those changes coincide with their enrollment growth over the decades. So you can see under a quarter century ago, in 92, they still had less than 10,000 students. They were over 20,000 by the early 2000s, and that's when they would become the only school to elevate themselves from the junior college level to NCAA Division I. And in the past 20 years, they've doubled their enrollment all the way to 46,000. A fascinating comparison is Utah Valley to a historic rival in Utah Tech down in the southwest corner of the state, St. George. These are two rivals where one school actually used to be named what the other school is named today. That is Utah Valley, once upon a time being Utah Tech. They were both at the junior college level in the Intermountain Collegiate Athletic Conference and then the Region 18 Basketball League, which became the Scenic West. They would both later reunite in Division I and in the WAC. Dixie State would become Utah Tech, and now Utah Valley will be leaving the WAC to join the Big West. Utah Valley's conference history would start in '74 when they would join the Intermountain Collegiate Athletic Conference, ICAC. Utah Valley would spend a dozen years in the Intermountain Collegiate Athletic Conference until '86, when the Region 18 Basketball League would form with the ICAC 5, Ricks, North Idaho, Southern Idaho, and Treasure Valley Community College. 3 years later, the Region 18 Basketball League would be renamed the Scenic West Athletic Conference, the SWAC. And you could see a Utah Valley SWAC Champions ring at the top. Utah Valley would remain in the Scenic West for over a dozen years. When in 2003, Utah Valley would start their move to NCAA D1 in 03-04 and start playing D1 schedules in 04-05. Utah Valley would become the only school to upgrade directly from NJCAA to the NCAA D1. Initially, school administrators discussed moving to D2, but the travel costs were the same, and no D2 conference wanted Utah Valley. Utah Valley's goal was to join Southern Utah in the Mid-Continent Conference, but was prepared to go as an independent if needed. And independence is what they had to do. Utah Valley would be an independent for 5 years until 2009. They would join the Great West Conference, which did not have an AQ. And in 2013, Utah Valley would finally acquire AQ access by joining the WAC. Eventually, their historic rival from their junior college days, Dixie State, would join them, today Utah Tech. And after 13 years, Utah Valley will depart the WAC and join the Big West Conference.